Hi, welcome to this vlog. My name is Harsh Vora, and I want to discuss with you a little bit about the BRICS nations, what role they play in the world stage today, and what that implies for the world economy in general. So BRICS, like most of you may know, stands for the emerging nations of the world, namely Brazil, China, India, Russia, and the newly added member South Africa as well. This acronym was first coined by Jim O'Neill, a British economist at Goldman Sachs, and he basically wanted to refer to all the emerging nations that are poised to contend for top spots in the world economy. So my main goal in this video is to invite you to ponder over two main questions. First, do you think that the BRICS are prepared enough to have an equal say in world affairs? And second, given the emergence of BRICS nations, how would the ideological underpinnings of the world economy shift? So in other words, will they shift towards freer markets and more liberalization, or will they shift towards more government controls, regulations and restrictions? So let me begin by addressing the first question. About 2 to 3 centuries ago, China and India were among the wealthiest nations of the world, and it looks like they are brimming with self-confidence once again. At purchasing power parity, computed at purchasing power parity, China is already like the second largest economy in the world, and India, I think, is 4th or 5th in terms of purchasing power parity. So here it's important to remember that this is in aggregate terms and not per capita terms, in the sense that if you look at per capita income of India and China relative to other developed nations, then they are still low, although they are increasing. And poverty levels are high, although they are decreasing at greater levels. And if we look at population expansions in these two countries, then each country, China and India both, house about more than 1 billion people. And if we add South Africa, Brazil, and Russia in this list, then we have a larger share of the world's population, and we have a growing share of world's economic activity as well. Having said that, may I suggest that it is ultimately the West that will determine the response to Europe's sovereign debt crisis that's been going on recently. And this is not because they are supported by global institutions like the World Bank, IMF, and UN, but it's mainly because their word is backed by military and diplomatic power. Yes, granted that the BRICS nations are advancing rapidly in terms of purchasing power parity, but what they lack, in my view, is political strength. They lack a strong commitment to supranational institutions and to universal values such as human rights, collective defense of the democracy, a robust climate change framework, and so forth. And at this point, given this, a permanent seat in the UN Security Council for India and Brazil, coupled with greater international participation of China and Russia and South Africa, may actually end up undermining the liberal democratic order. And although in this regard, their entrance may make international bodies more globally representative. But so to sum it all up, my answer to the first question is that it would be better if developing countries first gather political will, and they first gather political strength, and then they will be better prepared to sit on the same plane as developed nations. So that answers the first question. Now, many people in the West think that the rise of BRICS nations must come at the expense of the West. If we look in terms of absolute incomes, this may not necessarily be true, because a greater international integration through trade and finance, if managed properly, will lead to mutual benefits. But how far is this true? Gains through trade and finance, they imply that both sides, the East and the West, or one country and the other, have less trade barriers, have lower trade barriers, lower import duties, and have greater economic freedom. Only in that case can trade be beneficial. But if that doesn't happen, and as we'll see, that unlike G7 countries, BRICS, they are different, very different in terms of goals, and very different in terms of approaches as well. They have divergent political systems, different foreign policies, different economic interest, and different levels of development as well. This is not all. They have serious conflicts among themselves as well. Like, for example, Brazil has been an open critic of China's distorted currency regime, and India and China continuously spar over border disputes. So, so in the midst of this, there is one thing common among all BRICS nations, and that is that their preference over controlling the market forces when it suits them. For example, BRICS nations, they have made it clear that they do not largely favor free financial flows across the system, and they are not big friends of volatile commodity markets either. Regulation of derivatives markets of commodities is something that they highly encourage in order to prevent market destabilization. And that's not all. Even French President Nicolas Sarkozy advocated more regulation of commodities market and better management of capital flows across the system in the last G20 meeting. And if we look at G7 countries, they intervened in the currency markets as well to depress the value of yen in the wake of Japanese earthquake, the recent earthquake that happened in Japan. So there is evidence that G7 countries and developed countries have been involved in market interferences, but on the whole, if we see, G7 at least have had an overarching belief in liberal economic systems and in free markets to support growth and free enterprise. This is not the case with BRICS nations necessarily. At best, I think BRIC nations, they hold very mixed attitudes about open markets. Yes, they have liberalized their economies to a larger extent, but they're not the last bastions of Adam Smith's free market philosophy. For example, we look at the license charge that happened in India. It died hard, and although the Indian economy liberalized after 1991, the private sector is still entangled in bureaucratic meddling. Similarly, Russia and China are proud adherents of state capitalism, where governments have more control over the resources, state resources, and over the means of production. And rather than allow that controlled currency to appreciate to better combat inflation, for example, Chinese bureaucrats would rather control the private sector into halting their price increases, like it happened with Unilever. If you look at Brazil and South Africa, they are the major commodities exporters, and they would be perfectly happy to see the prices soar for the commodities that they sell. But I would find it hard to believe if they are in favor of controlling the prices for iron ore or gold. All of the BRICS nations have been huge beneficiaries of free markets, which have boosted their wealth and have created employment for their large populations.